Welcome to the Legacy Lounge, Dr. Jeremy Lurey.
Thank you. It's great to be here today.
We're excited to have you bring all of your experience to bear with your PhD in organizational psychology, which you came by also after working at PricewaterhouseCoopers and Anderson Consulting. So a depth of experience to bring to family matters. Welcome.
Thank you.
Can you tell us a little bit more about your background? I've hit some of the corporate highlights, but
Sure.
Can you tell us about what Family Legacy First does?
Yes, I'm happy to, and we can go back a little bit further than that
Perfect.
as we continue the conversation. But starting with Family Legacy First, I've found over the years, blending my background in psychology with the big firm consulting experience really helps families dig into the issues, the challenges that they're facing, but from a much more structured way. So we often talk about family governance, right? Using tools from that consulting toolkit, but really helping enhance those relationships and drive family harmony from generation to generation. So we work with families across the country, some internationally. It doesn't matter the makeup of the family, whether it's a married couple with children. We've got 3-4 generations deep. It really is about helping them achieve the goals that they want, and often for preserving that legacy over time.
I really like the fact that you're applying a lot of science with your PhD and also with the corporate background. So how do you spend a typical day? And please speak to us a little bit more about what diagnostic tools you use to help bring more harmony to families.
Sure. There is no typical day for me. That's part of my neuroses. I love change and variety as we talk about, the different firms I manage and the work that I lead. But if I think about, sort of a common client day, I have a family I've been working with for 3 years now. We led a family retreat in Lake Tahoe, which is on the Nevada-California border. Beautiful lakefront property. We brought all the family members together. They have a family business. So part of that retreat was a board retreat. We had an actual board meeting, and so I'm using board governance tools, which is everything from the initial agenda to having them motion and second and vote on specific things like their CapEx spending for next year. Or in this case, we're actually professionalizing that board by bringing independent advisors to the family. So they had to actually vote on these candidates and choose how to move forward with the board. And we invited all of their children, in this case it's their third generation, to the table to observe that. They are beneficial shareholders, so at some point in the future they'll be owners. And that gives them the context to then have the family retreat. And then that's a completely different agenda, trying to build a family council, talk about philanthropy. They're expanding from their business to talk about venture and some other things that they might do moving forward. That family happened to have one married-in partner in the third generation now, one fiance that was about 2 weeks into engagement. So as the family grows, it's really important to have these meetings with whatever regularity, quarterly or annually, and then bring these types of tools from a governance perspective to keep them connected over time.
I can see how it could keep you busy year after year because family dynamics are always changing. You can think that you've got it set. And you work with family-owned businesses,
Yes.
but you also work with CEOs. And can you spend a little bit of time on the fact that you do have different consulting verticals?
Sure. So as you said, I come out of PricewaterhouseCoopers, June 17th, 2002, my last day with a paycheck that wasn't somehow self-generated. And the original firm is called Plus Delta Consulting. So very much a big firm in a small boutique box. And we would consult with large corporations and do everything we could to help them improve performance. And that's talent management and HR. It could be change management if they're implementing new technologies or merging two companies. And that's really where I come from within the big firm consulting world. And I did that for many years.
In that capacity, did you help the leadership teams visualize the future and look at, what they were trying to achieve in terms of attracting talent and recruiting?
Sure. So sometimes we come into change and help design it. And I'll call that strategic planning and strategic change, where we are helping design their future. I've got a process around visioning your future. And I believe if we were in my office, not yours, you'd see a lighthouse behind my desk. I'm just a firm believer if we know where we're going, we're far more likely to get there. And that lighthouse kind of shows you, it represents where you're heading, where that landmark is.
With clarity, there's confidence,
absolutely.
Right?
So sometimes we might start in the beginning. But as an organizational change consultancy, it's not uncommon for us to be brought in after someone else have created that change. A CIO buys new technology. A CEO decides to acquire a company. And so we're now there to help manage that change process from a people perspective and help, two cultures come together in one company, or help people let go of a new or an old technology and start using a new one. So either way, we could be at the tail end of implementing change, or we can be at the very front end of designing change.
So that's how you really immersed yourself in the consulting field.
Yes.
How did you make that switch from working in a public or private corporate setting to now working with families?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I will recognize my wife, who's a branding and marketing expert. And so as I got deeper into that space, I joined a CEO group called Vistage. Some people might be in YPO or familiar with some other CEO groups. And that's where I met all of the small business owners and mid-market company leaders. And I heard all their problems that with a PhD in psychology and a background in consulting, I just felt compelled to help. And I would hear someone say something and say, do you want some help with that? And what turned from a favor into a paid consulting engagement, after several years, these group members and colleagues became my best clients, and they were mostly family-owned and operated companies and legacy, multi-generation family businesses. And so we created a second division called Chief Exec Coach, which was really intended to help those CEOs run their businesses more effectively. And I would lead strategic planning retreats with my clients. At the moment, it didn't matter to me that they were family-owned and operated. They were just organizations. But at the end of those retreats, those principals would come up to me, the shareholders or directors, and say, gosh, this was really amazing. Did you ever do this with families? And unfortunately, being overly confident, I said, yes, of course. And then I'd have to catch my breath and say, what do you mean? And that just sort of led down this path of now having the third division, really focusing on the family legacy, building on the family business background.
And it really makes sense, doesn't it, when you think about the fact that only 1 in 3 businesses actually succeed to the next generation.
Absolutely. I mean, here in America, if we look at the statistics, it is frightening how many family businesses disappear within those first 2 to 3 generations, right? And we've had the honor of working with some fourth generations. In our country, only about 3% make it to a fourth generation. One of my longtime clients, who's fourth generation now, is up on the market and looking to sell. I have another fourth generation family I've been working with the last year and a half. They just signed the deal last week to sell. And so even at that point, it becomes so much more special to get to a fifth generation or beyond.
It is that's an amazing statistic.
Yeah.
Why do you think that business owners make that decision to sell versus keeping it in the family sometimes?
Well, if you think about first generation wealth creators, so if I just use myself as an example, I came out of PricewaterhouseCoopers. Nothing against one of the largest consulting firms in the world, great accounting practice. It's not where I was meant to be long term. It was a great stepping stone. So I'm now a founder. I've started my own business because I had a passion for my work and it made sense for me. But go down 2, 3 generations, my children, grandchildren, potentially great-grandchildren, they may have no interest in consulting. They may not have my background in psychology. They may want to apply themselves in different ways. So part of it is just lineage. Families aren't necessarily going to pursue what their parents or grandparents did.
Absolutely.
But then, layer onto that, we're facing a very different world than existed 50 years ago, 100 years ago. My fourth generation businesses are 110, 120 years old. Imagine what the economy looked like in their marketplace back then. One of my clients literally produced the first ice cube in Minnesota. You think about being at scale and production, right? I mean, we have different technology now. We don't need that same manufacturer of an ice cube, given what we can do with refrigeration equipment and other things. So life has changed. But then I think the final piece that's important, especially for our audience, if you are one person in the first generation, you can sort of do whatever you want to do. When you get to a second generation, you might have a couple of siblings or a few cousins. You get to third, fourth generation, you're talking 50, 75 shareholders and mouths to feed. So I have several families that are worried. We don't think we can distribute what those shareholders, if you will, need. We may just have to sell and monetize through a liquidity event. And so the more mouths you have to feed, the bigger that family gets, the more challenging it can be.
It can kind of just make sense. But
Yeah.
then again, there are privately held companies that are very successful and would like to continue with the next generation. But it's not always in the cards for any number of reasons. And I think that you've experienced the fact that sometimes the siblings, cousins, etc., just don't get along. Can you solve that if there's some desire to keep the family in the business? How do you approach a situation like that?
So I've got a couple of examples coming up for me. And the first one I'll say parent-child. So in the third generation, this family had 5 brothers. One had already sold his ownership by the time I came in, so only 4 left. With one brother of the president of the company, there were a lot of daggers and spears getting thrown at him from his brothers because they just had peer level sibling rivalry, if you will.
So you were coaching CEOs and leadership teams. How did you make the transition from the company to working with families and family businesses?
Yeah, when I came out of graduate school, my focus was corporate consulting and working in some very large organizations. Somewhere along the way, as I was growing my company, I joined a CEO group called Vistage. And some people might be familiar with YPO or some other groups. And for me, I met small business owners and other mid-market business owners in that environment. And I just started hearing what they were going through and their problems and their challenges, which were very much about leadership or setting strategic direction, maybe even succession planning if they were looking to exit. And so I started asking if they wanted help. And before I knew it, I got brought into this entire world that was mostly family-owned and operated companies and multi-generation legacy family businesses. And so it was a very natural progression for me. I had this background in consulting that most people in that space were not used to. And as an example, I had one client that for me, they were just a company. I know they were family-owned, but I wasn't consulting to the family yet. And we led a strategic planning retreat. And it was a wonderful couple of days with their executive team. By the end of it, one of those principal shareholders came up to me and said, "Jeremy, this was really amazing. Did you ever do this with families?" And unfortunately, being a little bit overconfident in my abilities, I said, "Yes, of course." And then I said, "Well, wait, what do you mean by that?" And one thing led to another. And now I've been leading that family's annual retreats for the last 8 years.
And how is that different, working in a family setting as opposed to in a company setting?
So, for example, you may bring me into your company saying you have a vice president of operations or head of sales who's driving you crazy, and I need to put on my leadership coaching hat and try to figure out what they're doing or how to build up your team's capabilities. In that environment, working with that family specifically, some of my favorite clients are in their young 20s, and I'm helping with resume writing and interview prep. I have one young woman right now who has been struggling to launch, and she's currently living at home but wants to be out on her own again. She wants to pursue a career that she just hasn't had the support to start. And I get to put on more of a life coaching hat. I have 2 children that are in that age group. And so I sort of lived through it as a parent, but now I get to be this, very sort of supportive and compassionate Uncle Jeremy on some level for families like this.
Well, the ability to help someone find their path who's in the same family with the entrepreneur or founder you are working with must return just a multiple in terms of job satisfaction.
Absolutely. And I didn't start here. If I go way back, I will never forget being a college freshman. I went to Northwestern University in Chicago. I was walking onto campus, undeclared in my major, not quite sure what I wanted to do. And I just had this thought of, I want to be in business, but I don't have an economics background. Don't ask me to lead marketing or technology groups. I just wanted to help people live fulfilled lives. We work way too many hours not to love our work. And so over the years, I've sort of held on to that theme in companies, but now I get to bring that into families. And so you're right, growing up in the shadows of a very successful founder entrepreneur, or maybe it's just a very skilled and successful CEO or business leader who has a little bit more rigor in their lives than you might have as a teenager or a 20-something. And so to be able to bring that forward now and help those young professionals find their calling in life and live more fulfilled lives is, I couldn't ask for anything better in my career at this point.
That's great. Yeah. And so in an entrepreneurial environment, succession has become so important as America grows. And there are some family businesses that continue, but as we both know, less than 1 in 3 make it to the second generation.
Right.
And if the entrepreneur and the family are inclined to do that, what are some tools and some consulting tips that you have for those families?
Yeah, when I'm involved in succession planning, which is more of my client base, oftentimes I don't get brought in to have an exit, right? If there's going to be a liquidity event, they're going to talk to you about wealth management strategies. Right. They're going to talk to
M&A.
Tax planners. They're going to bring in brokers, all of that. So while I do have clients who go through a sale, most of my clients are looking at succession. And
Okay.
so there are two sides to that. Part of that is coaching the leader in charge now to go from manager to mentor, to no longer try to be the expert in the room, but to try to sort of reach a hand out to that successor. And there's a lot of coaching we could talk about there. My father took 44 years in his career to become an expert in his field of corporate bankruptcy. You can imagine that profile of a person letting go. And it's the death of them. It's not just the end of their professional identity. And so helping coach them through that emotional journey, recognizing they don't have to be in charge anymore. They've got a capable leader, hopefully, by their side. And then there's everything on the developmental coaching side, helping that successor step up and elevate, which requires giving them some sort of face time with their senior leadership or their board.
Giving them a voice.
Absolutely. Helping them identify what their vision is and then how to share that and sort of make the case for taking the company in any different directions.
When you have someone who is an A personality driver, and that's how they got where they were.
Absolutely.
I always laugh. Early in my career, I asked a business owner what made them so successful, and they said, well, I work half a day, 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. And I laughed, but hard work, that work ethic was really important, and their expectations are high. Is it difficult to get them to cross that line to become the mentor they need to be instead of the driver?
It depends on the person. Some are ready, whether they've had a life event or maybe a health scare. Maybe in one case I'm thinking of now, parents have passed away and they're realizing life is too short, that they just want to live their lives outside of their work. But I've got a client right now who, is struggling with that. 68 years old last week. He is a very skilled attorney. His son is in place to take over the business, but he's not letting go very easily. He continues to hold on to his craft, and he doesn't want to retire anytime soon. He wants to stay vital and keep working, which many do, but it's about refocusing him to what he does best. He doesn't have to run the company. He doesn't have to make all of those strategic decisions anymore if he has groomed the next generation.
But it takes a pretty confident person to be able to go through that identity crisis, if you will, to get to the other side, because they've always been the one making the decisions.
It does. And I call it the enlightened leader, who really have learned more about themselves and the rest of their lives and what they want to pursue. But you're right, many do not. Many are not ready to hand over the keys to the kingdom. I've written more articles on this than I can count. I'm not proud to say, but I don't mind admitting, when I was 16 years old and got the keys to the car, I got into an accident. If I were working a family business with my father and he still pictures that 16-year-old who wrecked the car within 3 weeks of getting a driver's license, what's going to make him respect me as a vice president of operations taking over the company or as a COO, right? So there's a lot of history. There. Absolutely. We all bring baggage into these situations.
And then you've got their role in trying to keep people together and keep harmony. When you've got siblings who have different interests or goals, everyone has their own agenda. And so if you've got cousins and multiple family members, what does it take to keep a group like that together? Or is it self-initiating?
Again, it depends on the family and their situation. Okay. There's a great quote, I attribute this to John Ward, who wrote books about family business. And he distinguished having the business serve as the glue to keep the family together and switching to now have the family serve as the glue to keep a family together. So many families who are enterprising families, it's the business.
It's the business.
And when they're all working together with the same goal, whatever their challenges might be interpersonally, they shove it down under the surface. And so helping them move forward to where their legacy matters, talking about philanthropy, which I know we will in a little bit, but giving them a purpose that's larger than that business. This family that I've worked with recently in Lake Tahoe, leading their retreat, it wasn't just a board retreat talking about business goals. It was a family retreat talking about family goals. And if they want to be philanthropic, if they want to get into venture, if they maybe want to support the children in their own goals in life, which have nothing to do with the business, but we could extend a loan or issue a grant and do a lot of things that much of it comes from having the family be family first and get away from the business itself.
And I mean, that's the key. I understand. And it sounds so optimistic to think of people that might be going in different directions to then be sitting down at the table really talking about philanthropy. And so there must be some steps that lead up to it. There's not just a light bulb.
Well, and let's think about some of the complex families you work with, where you've got multiple siblings, cousins, multiple houses, and generations. They don't always stay together. You might have the one branch who's managing their investments with you, and you may never talk with the others. Same is true of my clients. I may have one branch that I'm going to be working with who is more philanthropic or maybe is running the company. I've got clients right now where they're buying out siblings, and those siblings have no interest in the business anymore, which is fine. Our goal is to keep the family connected and drive family harmony. If you can sustain the business and allow people to go pursue other interests, that's not our goal, to keep everybody in the enterprise. And even larger family offices where there's no operating company, same thing. We have families with shared investments. We have families with very diverse investments where they don't.
So for that family member to really make a choice about, are they active, are they all in, or should they pursue other goals, that's some of the conversation that takes place.
For sure. And when we're talking about board work, we're talking about family governance, distinguishing between the active shareholder who is an employee and an operator versus the inactive shareholder who may just be, a steward. They might get involved in community impact. We used to work with a real estate family in Manhattan. You can imagine a very recognized family. You don't want one of the kids to go buy a Ferrari because they can and drive it through Madison Square Gardens. That would be bad for the family and bad for the community. So you don't have to work in the enterprise. You can do anything else you want as long as you recognize the responsibility of your last name and the family that you are a part of. And so that's oftentimes a lot of our work, especially with teens and 20-year-olds. So the younger generation, helping them understand that with this wealth comes responsibility, and talking about how we're going to do good with this wealth. I mean, that our parents, our grandparents, our great-grandparents may have laid the foundation for us to live our lives today, but we don't want to take that for granted ever.
And it's interesting, while these siblings or cousins, for example, could share a legacy view or vision, if some of them may fulfill that through the business and some may not. But leaving the family business is a bit like a divorce, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And I talk about business divorce all the time.
Okay.
I was talking with a family here in Texas a couple of years ago, and they were from a very recognizable family. You would know what their company is and does. And this one, third gen, I think, maybe fourth gen, was leaving the family. And he was going to walk away with significant assets. And I didn't get into the details of why he wanted to leave. But what was interesting was they were going to separate relatively amicably with part of the family, not so much with others. And so they would maintain their connections as best they could. Their reason for talking to me, though, was not about the business divorce, the separation, because that was happening. It was more about, what do we do with this liquidity event? And how do our in-law family get impacted by this? We can't just buy BMWs for our 16-year-old nephew anymore, right? We can't just tell our in-law family if they want to have Thanksgiving with us, they need to join us in Kauai because we can buy a home there now. So even having money does not bring happiness. It creates tremendous opportunities, but it really creates a lot of complexity for these larger family offices that you and I work with.
And if they can come to a fair settlement, but I think we all understand that money has an emotional value to it as well.
It does, yeah.
And what's fair is in the eye of the beholder, but in working as an organizational psychologist, you have to work with the psychology of money often, right? So was that hard? I mean, when they had the buyout of the family member, Was it a difficult process to go through financially, or could they navigate that pretty well?
So I have some families that have built up reserves in the treasury, are willing to buy out siblings
Okay.
and cousins, and it's fine. I have some families where that's not as easy. So one of my clients right now that's fourth generation and selling, the middle brother doesn't want to sell and he doesn't want to retire, but he doesn't have enough capital to buy out both of his brothers. And so the older brother said, I'm getting older, I want to retire. Younger brother said, I've lived a blessed life thanks to you and thanks to our parents and grandparents. I don't need to keep working. And so not all businesses are in the place to buy
Right.
out shareholders, or not that many at one
That's
time.
between a rock and a hard place,
Exactly.
right?
And so that's where the
that
liquidity
situation.
event comes in, potentially some type of private equity or a strategic buyer. But again, in that case, part of their valuation is that the middle brother will continue as CEO and provide continuity.
And I would imagine some entrepreneurs think if someone's no longer willing to stay in and around the business and contribute, that they really don't deserve to take away a big payday. Is that ever a problem?
Problems are a relative term. Yes, in some families,
Yeah.
there are lots of problems that come up. In others, there's appreciation for, I didn't work as hard as you did. I didn't work in the business. I don't deserve the same liquidity event that you might have. But it comes back to that big word, governance, right? Have we set things properly? Let's say that's happening in a generational transition. Our parents pass, and it was their generation, there was ownership, and so now we have an inheritance. If we haven't put our trust documents together where we all get 50-50 or a quarter, whatever it might be, it's not always fair. Sometimes people use equal, thinking equal means fair, but that isn't always fair. For
It may
you and I
not
to
at
get
all.
paid the same dollar because we're siblings or cousins, for you and I to receive the same dollar of ownership when you're working 60-hour weeks as CEO and I'm, no offense to my clients, but I'm the janitor. Right? I mean, there's a disparity.
Right. There is a disparity, and trying to work through those things may be challenging. And I would imagine
Yes.
that someone who, unless they've built a .com company back in the 90s or an AI company today and they get rich really quick, some business owners have worked a lifetime to build their business and build an estate. And they may or may not feel that their kids are willing to stand up and to take responsibility for that. Do you ever encounter that in your work?
So I have a family I'm working with in the Midwest right now. The business is 45 or 46 years old. Dad is closer to retirement, but he's sort of been revitalized with some of the business growth recently. They have 4 children. One is still in college, so she is sort of not in the middle of this. One is in business school now and pursuing other interests. He's not really in the mix. You've got one of the other 2 who is in the business, has been for a few years. One is talking about moving into the business but hasn't committed yet. Those are the situations that can be really challenging. You would think on paper the one son in the business will become the next CEO. But it's really not that easy because he's the youngest of the 3 brothers. If the oldest brother does come in, maybe he has years of experience working in corporate America that are of value. Maybe he should be the next CEO. And I'm not a big fan of co-anything, but we could create co-presidents. And so many different ways to approach that. That's why I appreciate doing the proactive planning. So that family, I'll be leading their family council meeting the first few weeks of December coming up, and we get to do sort of a pre-holiday gathering with them where they go to visit family. And again, part of that weekend is a workshop where the family council meets and talks about the business. And part of that weekend is just family holiday festivities. And so blending those together, I found to be really effective for some of these, what could be otherwise contentious scenarios.
To help people vision a path that is a best fit. So you talked about a board of directors earlier, and I would imagine that can be critical, especially in situations where there's a lack of clarity about successor ownership. Can you speak to me about the board of directors and how you identify directors in a family setting?
Yeah, I've spent the last few years of my career focusing specifically on board governance for the very reasons you're speaking to. I have a huge bias on this one, that if we have a family board, while they may be intelligent, they may be committed to the legacy, that's really like having family dinner. We don't typically have motions and votes on things. We don't typically talk strategically. Most families I know that don't really have a board, they simply sign a document at the end of the year for their bankers, their attorneys that says we have corporate minutes. That's not effective if you're going to go from first to second, second to third, third to fourth
And it
generation.
may not even include a valuation
Oh,
methodology.
absolutely. That's a whole other piece of rigor
Right.
that they typically
and that's
don't
half
have.
art, half science.
Right. So if you just want to have a family business, sort of more of the mom and pop, if you will, there's no need for a board. You've got a founder, wealth creator in charge, or maybe you've got two siblings who get along. Mm-hmm. That's fine. When I start driving to the board governance, it's because we're going to have a generational transition. We're going to move from maybe 2 people who work in the business to 6 or 8 owners, one who does, several who don't. To your point, we're looking at succession. We don't know who the right successor is. Should it be the non-family leader who's been with us for 20 years? Should it be the child who's been with the business for 5 years? And so bringing in a board is a great way to depersonalize some really challenging situations.
Typically, how many board members do you identify?
From the outside, could be 2, 3, 4 of them.
Okay.
It depends on how many we have who are owner, family leaders. If we have 3 or 4 family leaders, most of the families I work with do not want to tip the scales on control. So we might only have 2 or 3 outside directors, so there's still a family vote.
But those outside directors, you're looking for them to bring something very specific in terms of value to
Absolutely.
the board. What are you looking for there?
So let's say we're a manufacturing company and we have 2 facilities in the Midwest. Mm-hmm. We might be thinking about geographic expansion and going regional or national. Mm-hmm. Well, I want someone who's done that before. Or I maybe want someone who's an expert in commercial real estate because maybe we're looking to build a new facility in a new region. Let's say that we're 3rd generation and we've always been family owned and operated and working the business, but we know we might be looking at a liquidity event and an exit in the next 5 or 10 years. I want to bring a board member who has sold their business, or maybe someone who specializes in private equity. Maybe we have operational challenges. Maybe we need an industrial engineer or sort of a management consultant. I've got some families.
So it's a needle in a haystack kind of thing.
It could be industry specific or not. It could be regionally specific or not. Sometimes it's just someone who worked in a family business. I have a very close colleague. I've put him on 2 boards the last several years. He was 3rd generation family business leader, turned around his business after the housing crisis and the recession. And so he's done massive turnaround and growth, but he also knows family dynamics. And so,
great
again,
experience
you're looking for
bringing to
very
the table.
special unicorns,
Yeah,
oftentimes.
I can see that. And because otherwise, if you can't find that kind of guidance, succession becomes more challenging. And the options now, fewer companies want to become public.
Right.
And so if you're private, if you merge, you're outsourcing your succession plan to someone else. Creating one yourself is another challenge.
And sometimes that's the right strategy. I have a family I work with right now, 4th generation business. They are looking to exit because the 3rd generation owners want their liquidity event and they don't work in the business anymore. But they're going to try to find a strategic buyer who is another family owned and operated company who has similar values and approaches, is in the same region, not necessarily a private equity roll up. And so sometimes
that's a unicorn too, right?
Correct. And so it takes a very unique fit for that to work.
Interesting.
But I mean, I've written the articles on merging 2 companies, 1 culture at a time. There's a way to get people to come together if it's the right fit. But the reason I bring that up is sometimes outsourcing your ownership or your executive office is the right thing to do.
Right.
Sometimes it's not. Sometimes we can promote from within. And by the way, I've also written the article on hiring your first non-family CEO. It doesn't have to be the same last name to run our company. We have some family leaders who say, if it's not a Johnson, then we're going to sell. That's one approach. I have many others who say, this is the best investment we will ever have. No offense to what you can do for your clients on raising alpha, but our family-owned and operated company and the margins that we have and everything, we would never want to sell. If we don't have a rising generation leader to run it, we'll just bring in an outside executive, or we will simply have one of our senior executives who's been here and is like family run it. And their name might be Smith, not Johnson, but that's okay.
But if you have a private company that is a jewel like that, it's wonderful if it can continue. I worked with a family that reinvest 50% of all of their earnings back into their company. And it's proven to be a really good idea for them.
Yeah.
But when we're talking also going kind of beyond the sale, if you've got 4 kids, the owner may give shares to active kids in the business, may not give to others. How do you address that? Where, I mean, equal inheritance or equal gifts is equal love in the eyes of most kids, and yet it doesn't always work out exactly right.
Right, it does not. Sometimes it can. Sometimes there are offsetting assets. You might have commercial real estate or something. So there's no right or wrong, but I'd offer a pitfall, for example, that people need to be aware of. I was working with a family in Southern California. Dad was aging. Dad had 51% ownership of the company still. He had basically gifted to his son, who'd been working there for 15 or 20 years. And so he's 49% shareholder, minority owner. And you would assume that when Dad passes or when Dad chooses to officially retire, he would give the rest of the business to his son or maybe have, a transaction of sorts. Well, there was a daughter or a sister in the mix, but brother-sister had not talked to each other in years, very strained relationship. She had absolutely no idea what the company did, how to run it, no connection to it. And so Dad's going to gift her 50% and make them 50-50 owners. We're talking about the golden goose.
People that haven't worked or communicated together at all up to that point.
Right. Imagine what that would do to this inside president, the brother, the son. He actually wants to make the right decision to invest $1 million in forklifts. And sister says, absolutely not. I need to distribute $1 million to buy a new house. Just the stalemate that would happen in situations like that, which we talked about the board. What great way to use an outside board to help drive that decision making for you.
Absolutely.
So it's not about a family decision anymore.
Absolutely.
It's about what's in the best interest of our shareholder group, of our employees, the customers that we serve.
And so that's great to be able to even talk about that. But it's a fact that 47% of baby boomers have never had any kind of financial conversation with their kids. Is it a lot different with business owners or just people with large estates?
No, I don't know the exact statistics of family business owners, but I would actually offer it's even higher, at least of my direct clients. And some are family office.
Really, even though there's a shared interest in the business.
Yeah.
And money is that taboo,
absolutely
not to be spoken of topic.
Yeah.
But at the same time, if you can't align yourselves in the information and the direction of the family business or the family wealth, if it happens to be liquid, it's really a problem, isn't it?
It is. At some point, it becomes a problem, not just for the leading generation, but for that next generation. And I would rather it becomes a problem.
And the next.
Right. You can go on and on.
Right.
I share a lot of stories about my life. I'm second generation. My dad was a very successful attorney, and so I'm second generation in the wealth in our family. He never talked to us about money. I knew he had money. I went to private high school, private university, came out with no debt. I got to have a car on my birthday. I didn't have to take the bus anymore. But we never discussed how much money there was or how it would be distributed or what his life wishes might be until he had what I will simply call a near-death experience. He had what was meant to be a heart valve replacement. Should have been a very simple procedure in and out. He was unfortunately on the table, open chest cavity for 23 hours. They were trying to get the internal body parts and tissues and things to connect and work. Afterwards, his doctor had said to us, most other doctors in this country and around the world would have coded him out 3 times. But how dare I give up on my patient? His vitals were strong. He just was on bypass.
Wow.
So it wasn't until something like that happened for my father, he said, I need to sit down with my daughter, my sister and myself and our partners. Here's what we have. Here's what you can expect when I pass. My stepmother, survivor, gets this. Here's what you can expect when she passes. We have children, both my sister and me. Here's what they can expect. I have cousins. My stepmother have a niece and nephew who are really like her children. So you can see it sort of gets more complex.
Right.
I don't expect to get all of it. And my immediate reaction might be, why does my distant cousin get what my child gets? But thankfully, at least the way I was raised, that's about a 30-second reaction until I just say thank you and don't ever die. Mm-hmm. But imagine if my father had passed and he never shared that with me. And now I'm looking at my young cousin who's getting something on par with what I'm getting, or my children. And to not be able to have that conversation is tragic.
And yet it takes a near-death experience for some people.
Regularly. Or a massive liquidity event if we sell the business. And then it comes up, yeah.
But even then, some parents are fearful to share how much their estate is worth for fear of disincentivizing them.
Right.
Kind of creating a trust fund baby, if you
Right.
will. What do you think about that? Because if you hadn't known, or if you don't know what the tax exposure
Yeah.
may or may not be.
Yeah. So I hear that, and I am not being judgmental. I'm going to be descriptive here and say I hear that excuse more often than not, which is where I said I don't think it's 47% with my family business owner clients. I think it's 87% really don't want to talk about the money.
It's just
right?
uncomfortable.
It's uncomfortable. To your point, they don't want to raise entitled little brats who are living on the country
Right.
club. And, all these things that they worry about where they didn't come from money. They've had to create it. Or maybe they did come from money, but they had the integrity and the character to work. And so my response to that is, look at me. I know, generally speaking, what my inheritance will be. And it is not necessarily life-altering, buy a yacht kinds of money, but it gives me phenomenal peace of mind every single night I go to sleep that I don't have to worry about retirement the same way others might. I don't have to worry about paying for my children's education or my grandchildren's, because I know that's a core value of my parents, to fund education and give their children, grandchildren a better life.
As they say, peace of mind is priceless.
Absolutely. Yeah. And so I think that we do our younger generation a disservice by not disclosing something. They don't need to see the balance sheet. They don't need to know that you're going to get, $1.8 million at this age, and you're going to get $18 million at that age. And by the way, we have $180 million or whatever it is. The numbers get big. I understand that. But one of my favorite examples, longtime client of mine, 4 homes, 8 cars in the garage of the main property. We know that he's wealthy. There's no doubt that this person is wealthy. He owns multiple businesses, including a lakefront resort in the Midwest. He's been very successful in creating partnerships and new ventures. But his children have no idea what they might get, what the tax implications might be. This family is a very common one where the children at this point, 4th generation, their grandfather generation skip trusted down to them some shares of ownership. So their tax return every year, someone has to sign a document, but they have no idea what they're signing. They just know that the company is paying the tax liability for their shares. Which, again, very common, and I don't dismiss that as being reasonable. But to not tell them your shares are worth $1, and if we have a liquidity event, they might be worth $5, or all these things.
I've also seen situations where maybe one child is being disinherited, and they, unfortunately, the parents leave the surviving children to share that message because they don't inform them that that's the case. And it may be justified or not because it's their money. People should be able to do what they want with it, but not leaving that burden with the survivors might be great.
Yeah.
I mean, of course, it robs everybody of the drama of reading the family will, like the movies we've seen.
If we want to put together a soap opera, that's the way to do it. Don't have a conversation.
Right.
Let the estate planning attorney do it after, death, post-mortem.
Where the family all gathers in the room and
Right.
you're waiting to hear.
Yeah.
I always thought the whole concept of, not telling them and waiting and letting a stranger tell them was a little bit strange.
Yes. I mean, it's sort of on some level, it's cruel and evil to put them through that. They're mourning your loss, and now they find out that they get nothing, or they get your favorite rock or whatever. Again, we can go back to equal and fair. Let's just say that it's equal. Everyone gets, 1/4, and you think you're doing the right thing as a parent. But
Does that always work?
no, I mean, I have a family right now, 3 sons at the second generation. One lives in the Midwest, a relatively sort of comfortable life, and he's doing his own thing. One, the oldest brother or son, lives where this family's based, is the heir apparent to the business, and has been working in it for years. And so he's going to likely take over the business. It's a law firm. There are sort of legalities around what the bar will allow in succession. And, you know, I couldn't take over. I don't have my JD, and I'm not a practicing attorney admitted by the bar. But the third brother has really struggled the last few years. So mental and physical blocks. He is living off of the family coffers. Let's just say he does that for the next 10 years. Are you going to tell me that he deserves the same third as the other 2 brothers? The brother who's taking over the law firm and has this incredible asset, are you going to tell me he deserves the same third as his other 2 brothers? So equal is not actually fair.
Equal is not always fair.
Right.
And but being able to communicate that in advance in some ways brings a smoother transition.
Right. So when we talk about family meetings and retreats, that's part of it. Talking about the estate planning, the legacy planning, what is the vision for those parents, for those children, using my one scenario, getting it all out on the table, because it'll be contentious and it'll be emotional. And one of my favorite clients, 2 women who are sisters, when I lead retreats like this, I often do it at the Four Seasons where we live in Los Angeles. They have a phenomenal spa, and I will let them sort of go at it, hug and cry and yell and scream and everything. We get every emotion you can imagine during the day. But 4 o'clock, we're done. And I send them to the spa. I've already booked massages for them. And by the end of the evening, they get to be sisters again and be loving of each other rather than feuding. But imagine if they didn't have that experience and they took this forward for years, never discussed it, never shared it, never resolved. And now it's impacting their children who are cousins who really act like siblings. They're so close at that third generation. But those are the conversations people generally avoid.
And without that, I've spoken, and I know you're familiar with the concept of cutoff, where basically 2 family members can't get along, and then it means not just a cutoff between those 2, but a cutoff for the next children and the next generation. Right. And so cutoff, have you seen much of that, and how do you address that in some of your work?
I have a family right now, and I sort of label things as tragic because it's heartbreaking. The family's going through significant litigation that's been written up in the news. This family branch, so this one sibling, is suing his other siblings, and we'll just say for bad actors, right? He hasn't seen his father in months. Father has not been able to talk to his grandchildren in months. And so this family branch has been cut off because of the litigation and maybe because of what the bad actors were doing. And my role is to help bring them back together. Now, I don't expect siblings to spend time together anytime soon, at least till we resolve the litigation. But at least for that parent or grandparent to be able to reconnect with this branch of the family, I mean, that's the stuff that I love, the role I get to play, because I get to bring families back together again.
Such value. Don't you think, too, that a lot of times when someone's thinking about their will, and by the way, we know that only 30% of Americans even have a will, and that's true no matter what economic sphere they're in. But don't you think there's a lot of self-talk? You know, people think, well, I'm not sure if this child is ready, or I don't know if I like who so-and-so married. Are they an in-law or an outlaw? And so they just have all this talk going on in their head, and it precludes them from taking actionable advice.
Yeah, I definitely do.
Do you
see
ever
that.
encounter that?
I do. I mean, you know better than I do. We have things like trust documents that can create structures to protect for, you know, all of that self-talk that we're worried about. But I do think a lot of it is self-talk of, I don't want my children to grow up to be spoiled brats, so I won't tell them how much money we have, or I won't give them as much as maybe they need. And then something happened. So within my family, my son graduated with his master's, wanted to buy a condo after graduation, really settled down in his roots. He wasn't able to do it on his own. He had some money saved to do that, but he got grandparent support and parent support after graduation as a graduation gift. But now my parents are thinking, well, if we did it for him, what about the other 3 grandchildren? And of course, so with my help and asking me some questions, they're now having conversations with the other 3 grandchildren of, hey, he was first on this, but we absolutely have expectations that you might need similar support when you're ready to buy your first home or do some kind of a remodel or whatever. And so now we're creating governance, we're creating a standard. That's, I think, the trick that most families forget. Rather than having a one-off, really look at that from a broader perspective, so that we may have someone we want to cut off who doesn't fit into the family. We may have an outlaw, not a really, blessed, supportive in-law. And so those are very different conversations. But when it comes to the assets and the emotions around money and sort of treating people fairly, those are the pieces that most just get wrapped up in trying to be generous or trying to take care of their children or grandchildren and forget the implications.
Right. I think the key takeaways from what you said are, first, financial literacy is a gift for people to understand what the tools are that will allow them to achieve precisely the goals they want to. But it takes an investment of time. You have to do a will and talk to somebody who knows about that. But then the second thing is, be careful about the expectations that you do make, because if equal gifts and equal love is something that's an expectation, then you need to be prepared to think longer term, the long game, on how you strategically gift.
Yeah, and I have families where they look at legacy wealth as not being anyone's. It is a chest of gold that sits over there. You get to live your life, and if you want to make a lot of money, you better go be a doctor and go to medical school. And by the way, the legacy wealth might help support your education. But if you don't
But again, that's where governance, that's, I guess,
Correct.
another major takeaway is, if you don't have core values and principles and actionable practices about what is fair and who deserves what and who does not, then it becomes very difficult, because money's so emotional.
Right. And so the family I'm thinking about is 5th to 6th generation wealth. Wow. And they have more wealth than any of them will ever need, but they don't use it in sort of an abusive way. It's typically for housing, first down payment, maybe to help someone get a home. It's for education. In my case, the graduate school, my parents were divorced by then. I paid 1/3 of my graduate school, so I wasn't completely off the hook with my education, but that's typically where the legacy wealth goes. And then special needs. And, I don't think if any of us would question supporting somebody with special needs, whatever they might be. But until you label it that, until there's sort of a chronic illness or a problem, then people who live off of that wealth are really abusing that. And at some extreme, I will use language to my clients and say, are you sure you want to let your son steal his siblings' inheritance? Because that's what it is.
That's pretty
right?
straightforward.
That's about as in your face as you can get. And I mean, no offense when I say it that way, but it has them think through differently. You're right. And if we're going to give this person, living money for the next 10 years, maybe we do need to adjust the trust documents and the will, and maybe we do need to change things, because equal is not equal at that point when we pass.
And that is what can often strain communications between family members. So what tools do you use at your family retreats? Talk a little bit more about your family meetings or retreats. The setting, it sounds like it's not an office meeting. It sounds like
Rarely.
It's out there somewhere.
Yeah.
And how do you bring governance to the table in those types of meetings so that there can be some decision-making parameters?
Sure. One of the things I appreciate about what I do is there's no cookie cutter. There's no one approach, right? Every scenario, every family, their life cycle is going to be a little bit different. I do have some retreats that are in the corporate boardroom, but that's much more of a family business meeting, going over a P&L and talking strategically about the business. If it's truly a family meeting, I prefer mountain towns and somewhere beautiful. That's just me. I have a family that's talking to me about doing their family retreat next year on their yacht. And this is a 200 plus member family where they have a yacht, right? Where something like that is what they do to all come together. And so whatever your tradition is, I know people who go skiing in December around the holidays. I know people who go boating and to lakefront properties in the summer. But whatever that is, I do think getting away from the office, getting away from that business setting is important. When we're setting the agenda, I try to really focus on legacy and connection and family harmony. So I'm going to ask questions. What is it to grow up and be a member of the Stavis family? What are your favorite memories as a parent, as a child, right? And I mean, I've had some incredible conversations where people go, honestly, it was just Sunday night dinner, hanging out in the kitchen, cooking together before a busy week of school or work, and just being silly.
The 2
That's what
hours
they
it took
love.
to decide which
Absolutely.
movie we were going to watch.
Right. When we are honoring, the foundation or the trust that great grandma, great grandpa started, what do you think would make them so happy about this meeting right now? And so, I mean, again, background in psychology, I get to ask questions most typically don't stop to think about. And that's often a foundation. Turn to the person next to you. What do you appreciate most about them? What have they done to support you this last year since we met? And so those are about connection. The part about sort of sharing openly, we often know about the business. The business is doing well, it's struggling. But how was your last year in college? What are you thinking is your career aspiration now? And from a personal perspective, not you have to join the business in 3 years, just to, I think I want to be a teacher. Or
what are your
I'm going to
interests?
film school and I really want to get into producing documentary, whatever that is. But yes, about interest, having them sort of explore what their calling in life may be. There could be someone else in the room who might help support that in some way. All of that's foundational.
I think that's brilliant because I think most people, in anticipation of a family meeting, would think, this is going to be really heavy, and I'm going to have to hear about a bunch of legal documents, and I'm going to have to hear about why I'm not living up to expectations, or, I mean, any number of things, because again, you don't know. And it can, if not handled right, the family meeting could destroy incentive if it's
Absolutely.
not handled right. I love
that
your
can
approach.
backfire. So you and I know a lot of professionals in this space. We have great colleagues who do insurance. They might want to go through the balance sheet of all the properties and all the cars and talk about the risk profile. There's value in that. What you do in an annual retreat with your client to share, again, balance sheet, investments, what's up, what's down, what are we diversifying into? There's value in that. I could go on and on to all the different professionals. I don't have a technical craft or a document to share in that same way. So for me, it really is about the connection and the relationships and talking about what traditions or rituals we want to make sacred in our family. And it could be the Sunday night dinner for everyone who lives in the same geography. And for those who don't, get on an iPad and do a FaceTime or a Zoom meeting and bring them into the room with you in the kitchen. I don't care if they get
That's a
Domino's
really good
pizza
point.
or not.
I mean, America looks a lot different now than it did
Absolutely.
50 years ago
Sure.
when a lot of wealth was created. And
Yeah.
it's cross state lines with marriages and cross borders and, a collision in a good way of religions and diversity. But it does make it sometimes harder to keep that family network together,
Right.
doesn't it?
So here's the difference between what I would call a true family meeting and what many of my clients do before they realize there's a difference.
Okay.
Midwest family, I've shared some examples about who they are earlier. They were planning a spring break trip to Aruba. And I was talking with my principal client, the patriarch, the CEO, a couple weeks, maybe a month before the trip. And he recognized they needed to have a family meeting, talking about who might want to work in the business, talking about, business strategy, all that. I said, that's great. What are the dates? And he gave me the dates. I said, well, you haven't invited me yet, but I'm actually available. If you want me to fly to Aruba, I will. He's like, oh, no. We don't need you to be there. I just wanted your help to design the agenda and create the workshop. Great. So I did my part. 2 weeks after the spring break trip to Aruba, you know where this is going. Hey, how was the retreat? What retreat? Well, you said you were going to meet with them and talk about all this in Aruba. Yeah. We were on the beach sipping Mai Tais. Like we never got to it. So a retreat or a meeting is intentionally scheduled time, bringing together whatever collective of the family. It's not a vacation. It's not the 80th birthday party. It's not the 50th wedding anniversary. It's not the birth of a child or, unfortunately, the death of a loved one. It is a time that we create, however we want to structure it, on the ski slopes or on a river or whatever. But it's being very intentional. This isn't selling me. You don't have to hire me to do it. If you have a family champion internally great, but most families do not.
I
Most
think
families
that's
fall back.
such an important. How many people planned to have family meetings that never happened
Right.
because it wasn't intentional, and mostly because they thought it's going to just bring everything down if we do this.
Right. They don't want to
Let's
do
just
something heavy.
Keep on with the vacation and not spoil it.
Right.
But again, if handled right, it returns such a multiple in terms of family connectivity
Right.
and just a peace of mind
Yeah. I mean, let's
for
face it.
everyone in the family.
One of the things I love about your podcast, we call it the Legacy Lounge. When I do this with retreats, I'm focused on legacy, not business performance, not philanthropic goals. And yeah, all of those elements might be in there, but I'm really trying to drive at legacy and family harmony. So I'm going to give some structured time, and it could be walking around the resort with a loved one. It could be family dinner one night. It could just be part of our workshop that's not as focused on a specific goal. And it's about connection and reconnection and recognizing what our nieces, nephews, children might be up to and helping support them in achieving those life goals. That is not something you're doing on the beach with a Mai Tai,
Yeah.
right? Or out back in the river with your fly fishing rod. It just, those are different experiences and cherished, wonderful, blessed experiences, but not a family retreat, not a family meeting.
And you really do need to have some connectivity before you really, as a wealth creator or parent, need to even do a will that matters and determine what specific assets would go where. I can remember a conversation, two 70-year-old twins that were arguing about a barbecue pit because that's where all the family and generations would have their holidays. And there was tremendous valued real estate, but it was this barbecue pit because of the sentimental value of it. And so there is something to be said for doing the detail work too,
Sure.
getting beyond, I just give everyone a quarter or everyone half.
Right. We were speaking with one of your clients recently about wanting to do a family retreat and bring the family together to talk about their legacy. We can't just throw them all in a room and say, we're now going to talk about this. There has to be lead up. And so typically we interview every individual family member, understand their
In
wants
advance of that
in
meeting.
advance,
Yeah.
understand their wants and needs and their goals and objectives. We then craft the agenda with whoever our champion might be. We then lead it. But again, it's coming from a place of appreciation and family harmony, and it's much lighter than you would expect because it's not just about the balance sheet. It's not just about our risk management portfolio. It's not just about the results of our business. All of those are elements. And we might do it at the family property. They might have a ranch, or they might have a ski chalet, or they might have a yacht, or whatever it might be. So we don't need to go to the Ritz-Carlton or the Four Seasons. We don't need to travel the world to a destination. It can be somewhere very comfortable. And I know families, one in particular, very large family, 4 generations in the mix. They bought their own retreat center. And now they use
Really?
it for the public, but this
Right.
is their annual retreat that they go to in Southern California every year for 10 days or so. And that's their tradition.
But there's probably a very intentional agenda. And
Absolutely.
everyone has some idea of what to expect, but even to get to that place, it's often been said that you have to know someone, like them, and then you trust them. So this takes time.
It does.
You mentioned one family you've been working with for 8 or 9 years.
8 years, yeah.
If a family needs to get started, you start with the interviews. Is that the key?
It starts with recognizing a need. And sometimes it's an opportunity. I'll frame it more positively. The need would be we're, sort of mourning the loss of someone and we need to figure things out. The need would be we're expecting the liquidity event, this next year. But the opportunity is just recognizing that, to your point, America is a much larger place than it used to be for these families. And we may have children who've dispersed for college. We may have young adults who have dispersed for jobs and work around the country. And so the opportunity to just reconnect and bring them together. And so, yes, we typically start with some individual interviews. If you have an 80-person family, I don't have to talk to all 80, but somebody within each family branch, within each family generation, to get a sense of the family history and their legacy. We would then design an agenda, which if you're just getting started, you're probably not going to put philanthropic goals as the first thing on the agenda.
Maybe they
But-
would come last.
But we may talk
But
about
maybe not.
legacy and community impact. Maybe someone just passed a pancreatic cancer and there's complete alignment that we want to contribute to that, or we want to have a 5K in our community and honor, someone who, things like that do happen. But starting small is simply about reconnecting, about giving people a voice, as you said earlier, understanding and sort of tapping into what our younger generations are doing with their lives, maybe offering a little bit of mentoring and support. You talk financial literacy. I could easily see one of my family retreats where you are there to talk about, FICO scores and what it takes to prepare to make a down payment on a house or
So
to pay
valuable.
for college.
Yes.
Right? We can't just assume that grandma and grandpa are going to give us $500,000 these days to go to college in a 4-year private university. Or by the way, my children went to public state universities, but not the state I live in. It's the same thing. It's $75,000 a year or more for many of these schools. So rather than going in with an expectation, it's a great chance for families to come together, talk about what matters most to them. We do values and vision work. We might do mission work around philanthropy and impact. It just really depends on where that family's at, where we might start, or what might pull them together.
And philanthropy comes into play where parents feel pretty much like their kids are going to be okay. The family is going to be okay financially. And then philanthropy, is not icing on the cake. It's core for some families. They'd rather more go to charity than the family, depending upon the size of the estate. But we're, to switch gears to a topic, we talked a little bit about death, and we know none of us are getting out of here alive, and we know that we're living in the platinum age of estate taxes because the new law now has created the largest exemption in history, $30 million per couple, $15 million per taxpayer. It exempts most people by far.
Right.
But above that threshold, there's taxation. Along with the inevitable comes taxation. And so do you think that family members, both first and second generation, really understand the tax impact?
My clients do not. Now,
Okay.
I'm working with some, I would call them less sophisticated families where they just haven't had that level of wealth over time. It's maybe newfound wealth or...
There's no need to know.
Right, correct. I mean, maybe
Okay.
they are slowly growing their wealth. So sure, they understand what our current administration have passed. They understand in concept what their wealth management teams or their tax accountants are telling them. But no, they haven't done the work as leading gen principals. And again, if I'm talking the largest family offices in the world, they know, and they have the advisory teams.
Right.
They may even have in-house counsel that do some of that for them. But for most of the families I work with that are still operating companies or growing their wealth, they haven't done that planning. Their
They've been
children,
so successful at what they're doing.
correct.
That they may not have had the time to discover some of the tools, ways to mitigate or
Right.
ways to eliminate or ways to pay the taxes
Right.
cheaply.
And where I might make introductions for teams like yours to come in and help because you have the knowledge base they don't. To your point, they don't really have the time because they're still working in the business or they're focused on their real estate. It's not real for them yet because they're in their 50s or maybe even at 60s.
Right.
They think they're still vital and have a long life ahead of them. It's not until something happens, which could be the heart attack or the stroke, it could be the loss of a loved one, then they realize, wait, our 20 or 30-something-year-olds, even 40-something-year-olds, don't know what they're going to get. They don't have a strategy in place to manage the tax.